Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us today. I have 12:01, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. I think we have a good presentation coming up, so this should be great. Um, I'm not going to talk much about this. It's the Wednesday webinars. You guys have been on them before, but if you have any suggestions how I can make this better, any suggestions for topics or for speakers, I am always accepting those and I will do what I can to get those filled. A little bit of housekeeping. So let's hold our questions until the end of the presentation today. If you think of something and you want to type the question into chat, you can do that at any time. I'm going to monitor the chat, and at the end of the presentation, I will go through the chat and we will make sure that all of your questions get answered. But otherwise, hold them till the end. If you want to ask them yourself at the end, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can still type it in the chat and I will relay it and we will get Jeanette's response on that. Something new and exciting today, we are going to now start offering certificates of attendance. So if people need certificates to, prove to your boss that you attended this, or for CEUs or anything like that, we will provide those. So at the end of this webinar, there's going to be a QR code. I need you to snap a picture of that QR code or use your camera to go to it. I'll talk more about the survey later, but you're going to see that at the end, so don't go away. And then, as always, I'll send out any resources and the link to the recording end of this week, probably early next week. So today's presentation, effective alerts and warnings. In this webinar, you will learn about the social science theory that informs the research on effective alerts and warnings, observe the warning room response model in practice as it is applied to historical warning messages, and identify strategies to increase message outcomes that lead to motivated behaviors. Public information officers with a role in emergency risk communication will gain a deeper understanding of the evidence that should guide alert and warning practices for all hazards. I'm very happy to announce our speaker, Jeannette Sutton, is going to join us today. So Jeannette Sutton is a Ph.D. She specializes in disaster and risk with a primary focus on public alerts and warnings disseminated via short messaging channels. Her current work centers on message design and testing across a range of hazard contexts, including atmospheric, meteorological, geological, technological, biological, and human-induced threats for communication via wireless emergency alerts and other channels. Most recently, she led the research, design, training, and implementation of the FEMA-IPAWS Message Design Dashboard, where she and her team developed lexicons and workflows for 48 hazards, plus all clear and missing persons messages. She is an associate professor at the University of Albany and is the founder of the Warn Room, which provides evidence-based advice on effective alert and warning messages. And she is a former resident of Lexington, so she has Kentucky in her heart. So, Jeannette, I am going to stop sharing my screen right now. You may say hello to everyone, and then the screen is yours. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for
Well,
joining us, Jeannette. I'm looking forward to this.
thank you. It's really nice to be here, and I do see a few familiar names in the attendance list today. And right before we got started, we were talking about Keeneland running this week and UK football, and having lived in Lexington and been a faculty member of the University of Kentucky in the College of Communication and Information Sciences. It is near and dear to my heart. So I really appreciate having the opportunity to come and talk with you today. So I am by training a sociologist, and I worked in a Department of Communication, and I currently am in a College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity, showing how the area of research that I work in is truly interdisciplinary and crosses all sorts of domains. I am not a public information officer by training, but as a researcher, the findings from my research directly apply to the work of a public information officer, and even more importantly, it applies directly to the role of the person who is sitting at the desk writing an alert or a warning message during an imminent threat event. So I wanted to just share with you really briefly just something that we did a few weeks ago, myself and my colleague, to show you the kinds of work that we've been doing with local organizations, such as those represented on this call. A few weeks ago, we went to Hamilton County, Ohio, just over the border. In fact, I flew into CVG and got to take that wonderful road into Cincinnati. And we spent a day working on alerts and warnings and did a full workshop. I began by doing what I always do, which is to do an audit of their historical messages and then help to review all of their revised templates. They rewrote 50 different hazard templates of multiple message lengths. And then we did a full day alert and warning training workshop with exercises, and my colleague Eddie Bertola joined me at that day-long meeting. And so if what I share with you today piques your interest and you want to go further than an hour together online, please just reach out, because this is something that I think that other organizations and regions have really benefited from. So let me start by showing you a socio-behavioral response to a warning message, which is the information that was referenced before as the warning response model. This was identified by Dennis Moletti and John Sorensen back in 1990, where they did a review of all of the research up to that date on what helped to motivate people to make an evacuation decision or a sheltering in place decision or some other protective action. And what they found was the first thing that's the most important is for people to receive the message. And of course, we think about the different kinds of channels that people could use today. At the time that Dennis and John were working, obviously social media was not around and email wasn't either, but word of mouth, sirens, local media, radios, those were really key parts of getting the message out to people. Now that we have these more diverse channels, such as wireless emergency alerts with short messages, that's where I spend most of my time focusing, because we as truly are like a siren in somebody's pocket. Most everyone gets those today, so long as they have cell coverage. But when they did their work on the warning response model, what they recognized is one of the most difficult things to do is to shift people from a perception of safety to a perception of risk, which is a question that I frequently get from emergency managers. How do I help people to pay attention? How do I help people to take the action I want them to take? And the warning response model lays out the message perceptions and the motivating factors that help to drive a behavioral response. And the key things that a public information officer has the ability to control are these outcomes that I'm going to describe, these message perceptions. You have the ability to affect people's understanding of the threat and the environment that it's occurring in. You can affect how people believe in whether or not the threat is real and is going to affect them, whether or not the actions you recommend will keep them safe. You can help them to personalize the information by including very clear location information and increasing their feeling of susceptibility to the threat, describing the impacts of the threat. And you can help them to make a decision about what to do to protect themselves by providing very clear instructions in your messages about how to act. We know from Dennis and John were not psychologists. They were actually sociologists and geographers. And they defined the warning response model not as an individualized process, which was just described as these message perceptions, which happen internally in an individual, but really as a social process. And the social process comes in because when people receive a message, they do not automatically act, shifting their perception from safety to perception of risk. Before they take that behavioral response, they always engage in this activity that they've described as milling, which is really message confirmation. It's the social aspect of looking around, paying attention to your environment, and talking with other people, looking for confirmatory information from other sources. So you know that when people get a message from you, they're looking across other sources, social media, calling a friend, looking next door. And in cases where you're not filling that gap, people are making up their own information. So this is a very social process. It's rather cyclical, and it's occurring all at the same time as people are trying to understand and confirm and believe and confirm at the same time. There are other things that we also measure, such as whether or not people feel like they are able to take action, whether or not the actions that are recommended are going to keep them safe. And really importantly, we've started to add in questions in our research about whether or not messages affect the organization's reputation and people's trust in the organization, which becomes really important in some of our findings. So the information that should be included in a warning message was also identified in the warning response model. And there are 5 key contents that will motivate action. And these things should be included in every message. The first thing is the source, using a local, familiar, or trusted source. We've now done research on source information, and we know that people receive up to 50 different notifications a day on their device. And many times those notifications look like spam. People don't know who they're from. But including the source information on a message helps people to understand that they need to be paying attention because it's trusted, it's local, and it's familiar. The second thing is the hazard and its consequences. We need to describe the threat, name the threat, and talk about the impacts of that threat on people and on the location. Location should be described using familiar landmarks, known physical boundaries, and clearly defining that location information. We know that when we look at messages going out from the National Weather Service, it frequently says, actually, it always says in this area. That's because those messages are automated. But as local PIOs, you have the ability to increase the effectiveness of messages for your local population by including information about where the threat is occurring and who will be affected. In addition to those 3 message contents, we need to also include protective action information, which explains what the actions are and how they can keep people safe and how to do them. And then an element of time, when the threat is occurring, when people should initiate action, when the threat was identified, and in the case that I'll show you in a few minutes, missing persons, when the person was last seen. We also know from the warning response model that message style increases understanding, and importantly, not using jargon, the information that's very familiar to you as a public information officer. Those things may not be familiar to your audience. The use of acronyms or abbreviations should also be restricted, and the importance of using very familiar words. I'm going to show you in just a second why visual attention is so important. We know from having done eye tracking research with participants that when you display a message in all caps, it's very difficult to read. It also means that you are yelling at your audience and people can't identify the information that's most important in the message. Using all caps selectively helps people's eyes to be drawn to specific words, and it also increases the sense of urgency for those specific things you want people to see. And also that information is better remembered. But this is what I mean by don't use all caps. This is an actual message that went out over the wireless emergency alert service. It was a message, well, it's written in all caps for a missing person. Lots and lots of abbreviations and acronyms. And it's very difficult to find the key information in this message as you look at it. I'll stop talking for just a second to see you can try and digest this. Even working with people who are professional dispatchers and law enforcement, it sometimes takes them a few minutes to get through this message, and they're not always certain that they've translated it correctly when they've finished. And one of the things that is missing from this is who the sender is. FVPD is an acronym for the sender at the very end of the message, but This could be improved dramatically by using upper and lowercase letters and reorganizing the information, getting rid of the acronyms and abbreviations, and reorganizing the information so it is in a better reading workflow. So most of the messages that we see in wireless emergency alerts don't look like this. What we do find is messages that are missing the information that I had gone over previously that we know is important for motivating behavior. So when we've looked at messages, we've measured the frequency of the inclusion of those contents. We've conducted studies now looking at all of the wireless emergency alerts issued for the first 10 years of that system. We've also looked more deeply at missing persons messages and Amber Alerts, as well as all clear messages and also wildfire. And what we find is that messages are frequently incomplete. And incomplete messages matter. They matter because incomplete messages harm your organizational reputation. Your organization looks like it doesn't know what it is doing. And we know this because we've done experimental studies that has pointed to people's beliefs that the organization, because it is withholding, it appears the organization is withholding information and it reduces their credibility. Incomplete messages are also unclear and not actionable. And when information is missing and people do that milling activity to confirm, it actually delays their action. And this is more important for shorter fuse hazards than longer fuse hazards. But when they are unclear and not actionable, it reduces people's trust in the message. Incomplete messages also reduce perceptions of self-efficacy. And in some cases, that increases their fear and can reduce their action. And incomplete messages are one category of the new research on over alerting. The practices that are engaged in message writing does affect people's willingness to remain enrolled in alert systems. And if messages are incomplete and not actionable, it reduces the value to the message receiver, and people are increasingly likely to reduce their engagement with those messages in the future. So I'm going to show you examples of what incomplete and complete messages look like by comparing them side by side across each of the categories that I've mentioned. And as I'm showing them to you, I hope that you'll start to see the importance of including all of the information in each different message type that I showed. We know from our research that only 8.5% of 90 and 360 character wireless emergency alerts sent in the past decade would be considered complete. Only 8.5%. That was more than 6,000 messages issued by local alerting authorities. We did not include the National Weather Service messages or Amber Alerts in those, but Amber Alerts are considerably missing information as well. But our goal should be to increase the value of a message and the completeness by following the guidance that has been identified in the warning response model and then verified with the experiments that have been conducted by researchers since then. So first, message source was not included in 65% of the WIAs in that first decade. Here's an example on the left-hand side that says, police incident in your area, remain inside, lock your doors, and don't answer the door if someone knocks. Call 911 if you see anything suspicious. We will advise when clear. This is a pretty good message, but what we don't know is who the message came from, and if people are told that they will be advised by somebody when it's clear, they need to know who is sending that message and who's going to give them that advice at the end. So providing the source of the message clearly identifies who is issuing the message about the police incident in the area. Of course, there are other comments that can be made about this particular message, but we're just going to stick with source on this one. Secondly, hazard type. Hazard type was included in a lot of the WIAs, but 27.5% of WIAs did not include the hazard. On the left-hand side, we see an example where no hazard name is included. In this case, it's the County Office of Emergency Management. telling people to leave area south of Folsom Lake or move to higher ground now, avoid area until further notice, and to check a website for updates. Pretty good message. However, people don't know what they're being asked to leave for or why they're being told to move immediately. When we added information about the dam failure in our experimental research on this particular message type, we found that people felt that they had a much greater sense of efficacy and understanding because they understood where to move to and where to leave from. Without that clear information about the particular threat they were trying to avoid, they didn't know what direction to travel. The third part which goes along with hazard, is the hazard impact statement. Now, this is not included in almost 80% of the WIAs in the first decade, which makes a lot of sense because it's not frequently the thing that's emphasized when we say you need to include all 5 pieces of content. But we know that this is a key piece of information that people really need in order to make a decision about what to do to protect themselves. On the left-hand side, you see an image of a message with no hazard impact. In this case, the source is the city emergency management. A chemical release has occurred at city center. And if outside or driving, go inside the nearest building and stay indoors until further notice. It's fairly complete if you understand what that chemical release can do to you if you are exposed to it. On the right-hand side, we share the impact information. That exposure may cause difficulty breathing, loss of coordination, a burning sensation in your eyes, nose, throat, or lungs, which will clearly indicate to people that they need to avoid being exposed to this chemical at every measure. I know that recently there was a significant chemical release due to an explosion just north of Kentucky, and that the debris that came down was toxic, and that people who touched it, it was like touching Clorox, that if it got on your skin, it was burning, and that exposure to it would be really, really harmful to people. So telling people that it's just a chemical release doesn't really give people a clear indication of what will happen if they're exposed to it. But by giving them this additional information about the hazard impact, it will clearly indicate why they should protect themselves and how they can protect themselves from that exposure in a much better way. Location was not included in 16% of the WIAs in the first decade. On the left-hand side, you see an example where no location information is included, where the county sheriff's office has issued a message for a police incident in your area, and people are to remain inside, lock their doors, don't answer the door if someone knocks, call 911 if you see anything suspicious. And again, they will advise when clear. Now, if people understand that they receive a message that says in your area, that means that they were geographically targeted in some way to receive that message, perhaps this is sufficient. However, it's much better for people to receive information about that includes the location so they can make better sense of the message. And I'll show you why in just a second. Here's a couple of examples of inadequate or incomplete location information by comparison. Some organizations are now making use of zones instead of spelling out the location. On the left-hand side, you see an evacuation order in effect for zones LOW-E169 due to wildland fire, which requires significant public education. And in this case, this message should have had a link to show people where to go to find out whether or not they were in that zone. Zone information is very useful for operational management, but much less useful for people who are unfamiliar with zones when they receive a message. And on the right-hand side, you have an example of how every National Weather Service WIA is issued, which says in this area. And that's because those are automated, and people in the weather forecast office will not be entering location information into their alerts. Time is not included in about 60% of WIAs. We know that this is important for many reasons. On the left-hand side, we see an example of a mountain emergency management message telling their population that a winter storm warning is in effect. The snow will be heavy and wet with possibility of power outages, and travel could be very difficult, and people should stay off roadways and stay safe. Now, I said the winter storm warning was in effect, but on the right-hand side, we find out that the storm warning will be in effect from 7 p.m. Saturday until Sunday at 1 p.m. And so the assumptions that are made when time is not included, it can reduce people's timing to get prepared or to know how long to prepare for. So adding that time is useful for those purposes. But also, time and location become really important pieces of information in another case. In January of 2025, Los Angeles County experienced significant wildfire events. And one of the messages that went out on the left-hand side here, you see this message went out, and it went out once. In this message, it says new. This is an emergency message from the LA County Fire Department. An evacuation warning has been issued in your area. I'll just stop there. Those two vague pieces of information meant that people didn't know when this message was issued or which part of LA County was being affected. In this case, this message got stuck in the system when the system malfunctioned, and it was repeated for 48 hours, and it went way beyond the boundaries where the original message was issued to. And so over the 48 hours, the message went out to different parts of the county, sometimes in the middle of the night to new populations, and they really had no idea whether or not it directly affected them, and they didn't know if it was brand new. So by adding the time information and the clear location information into your warning messages, you have the opportunity to prevent these kinds of failures when the system itself malfunctions. This is, I think, just such a significant example of why it's important to provide that complete information, even when it seems trivial. And last is guidance. We know that guidance was not included in 30% of wireless emergency alerts. 30%. In this case, on the left-hand side, we have an example for wildfire. Prairie Emergency Services issued a wildfire warning, which was in effect for areas east of 180 and South Lake Drive, and people are to check the website for updates. Now, some people might say a wildfire warning is clear guidance, but that assumes that people understand that wildfire warning is jargon representing a particular action people should be taking. In some parts of the country, a warning is not a take action now message. It's a prepare to take action for wildfire. In other parts of the country, it does mean to take action immediately. When we revised the alert message on the right-hand side, we indicated that the wildfire warning means to leave the area now, to not use 180, and because the road is blocked. But by providing that guidance, it clearly specifies what people should do in response to that warning message that was then put out. So what's great about the messages that I've just shared with you, even though we know that so many WIAs did not include this information, is that we know how to fix this. We have more than 5 decades of research on alerts and warnings to point out how to improve messages, and through the FEMA-IPAWS program, we were able to create some tools and resources that I want to make sure that you have at your fingertips as you are designing your own messages. The first thing I want to point you to is the warning lexicon. The warning lexicon is freely available. It was published in 2024. We've had close to 15,000 downloads since 2024, both domestically and internationally. So I can make sure that, actually it's on the next slide. You can see I put up a bit.ly here at the bottom, and this is a real bit.ly. It really works. It's not spam. And you need to use a capital W and a capital L to go to that. When you go to the link, and you see your access to the warning lexicon, please go to the left-hand side of the screen where there is an option to download the supplemental material, because the supplemental material will provide for you all of the contents that are in the lexicon for all 48 hazards. This is such a useful resource. I know that other parts of the world are replicating this in other languages, and it's thrilling to see that the research can support these evidence-based practices and that people are implementing it. So just to show you why you can trust it, this is the work we did to develop the warning lexicon. We started by taking existing messages and deconstructing them, identifying the variety of hazards that are most commonly messaged about, identifying the protective actions that are consistently included related to those hazards. We did thematic analyses and grouped them into buckets relative to each hazard and the protective actions. And then we worked with subject matter experts to develop impact statements so that every hazard has a corresponding impact statement that goes along with it. And then every hazard also has a list of protective action statements that go along with it. So that when you get to the point where you're writing your message, you will find in the warning lexicon, in that supplemental material, a stepwise process that asks you first to identify the source of the message, and then the hazard, and then it provides you the impact statement and gives you a list of protective action statements to select from to help to build out your message. It also asks you to include the location information and time so that you don't forget to include all 5 important elements. We also verified the lexicon with subject matter experts, and communication subject matter experts reviewed it for language, and then we developed the final warning lexicon. But we didn't stop there. We also tested the warning lexicon in multiple places across the country, and we found that the use of the lexicon outperforms the standard of practice of messages that are written by people who haven't had this evidence base. So with this in your hands, you can improve your messages dramatically. We looked at 3 different kinds of messages for 5 different hazard types. And we started by doing our research in New York City, but then we went to 5 other places across the country. So this isn't just relevant to a metropolitan area on the East Coast. We were looking at differences in outcomes, those warning response model outcomes that I explained earlier, the understanding, believing, personalizing, deciding, and looking for additional information. And then these were the hazards we looked at to compare across hazard types: blackout, disease, police incident, heavy snow, and chemical release. And then the 3 different message types looked like this. On the left-hand side, you see an incomplete message, which represents the standard of practice. These were actual messages that we took from our initial deconstruction of messages. So on the left-hand side, you see the incomplete message. It's missing some of the contents that are necessary for people to make decisions and motivate action. The complete standard of practice is a message that includes all 5 contents, but not structured the same way that we are recommending in the warning lexicon. And then on the right-hand side, you see the lexicon built message, just an example, where it's the source of the message followed by the hazard, the location, the impact of the hazard, what people should do to protect themselves. And in this case, the time is depicted with the words "until further notice," because a follow-up message will be issued after this one. When we look at comparing these 3 kinds of messages, this is one of the easiest ways that I can present the outcomes to you. What we see is that the dark blue, which represents the most effective message type, is found in the category where the lexicon message was used. And that is for understanding and believing, as well as self-efficacy. We find that the complete standard of practice message works better than the incomplete message for understanding. And the incomplete standard of practice message is the least effective in comparison with the lexicon message. So what we're trying to emphasize here is the importance of utilizing the standardized language, standardized approach in order to improve the outcomes that we know make a difference in people's motivation to take action. And importantly, understanding what the hazard is, the impact, and what people can do to protect themselves linked to these feelings of self-efficacy are very important in motivating behavioral outcomes. It's understanding improves, belief improves, and self-efficacy improves. I wanted to show you the other places we replicated the study. We went to Detroit, Phoenix, San Diego, St. Louis, and Tampa, and found that by standardizing messages, we demonstrate that the warning lexicon message style it outperforms the standard of practice consistently. So when you get your warning lexicon document, you will see that this is what a complete message looks like when you put it in just kind of a general format. It's the source, followed by the hazard type, occurring in location at time, followed by the hazard impact statement, and the protective action guidance. And then we also suggest adding the statement of, for more information, visit a URL, so that if people need additional information, which generally they do, they know exactly where to go to get information. We have done similar research on post-alert messages, which most people would call all clear. We call them post-alert because sometimes they're not all clear, and also all clear is a form of jargon. When we think about the role of a post-alert message, we know that it serves as part of the communication loop and reduces uncertainty. So if an alert and warning, if the goal is to reduce the surprise and help people to make a decision, then a post-alert message reduces that uncertainty and signals the end of people's need to cope with the threat that they've been responding to, either through some form of protective action like sheltering in place, avoiding the area, or even evacuating. When we've looked across the messages that have been issued as all clear messages, we find three kinds, essentially. On the bottom left, we found lots of messages that were focused on the status of the message. Frequently, messages that don't include the hazard name or guidance are more focused on message orders, such as evacuation orders or shelter in place orders. And so similarly, a message status focused message would emphasize that those orders are lifted or expired. At the top, we found messages that were focused more on the hazard being resolved, such as the system is restored, the event is concluded. And so we found language indicating that represented by things like restored or contained. A third kind of all clear message we found was action and behavior oriented messages. So talking about behaviors that people can take or behaviors people can conclude, such as resuming, returning, or concluding. We took these kinds of messages and then tested them also, because you now have access to a post-alert lexicon as well. We compared an incomplete message, post-alert message, and a complete post-alert message. And then a third category that we added was people not receiving a post-alert message at all. And we found that we compared the incomplete message focuses on the message itself being canceled and the orders being lifted. The complete message focuses on the threat being contained and indicating that the area is safe and telling people what they can do in response. And in our experimental findings, we found that people who did not receive a post-alert message at all were the least satisfied, and that they preferred to receive that complete post-alert message because it reduces their information seeking about what happened and what to do. It increased their feelings about that they could decide what to do, and also their feelings of self-efficacy. And really importantly, people who received a post-alert message said that the organization appeared to be more credible, more transparent, and it increased their reputation with that population. And so finishing out a hazard message by closing that communication loop with a post-alert message is really important, especially for people who have been asked to take a particular action like sheltering in place, evacuating, or avoiding the area. And so a post-alert message looks very similar to an imminent threat message, where it's initiated by the source of the message, the hazard, then naming the hazard near the location at time is no longer threatening, and telling people what they can do now. They can resume behaviors, they can return to the area, they conclude an action that you've asked them to take. And then if there is new guidance about how to return or things to avoid, adding that information in to keep people apprised of how they can continue to protect themselves. This document is currently in press, and so if you're interested in having this as the non-published version, I'm happy to send that over to you and you can have access for that in your library as well. I have one more to show you, which is the missing persons alerts, because we did also do the content analysis on missing persons alerts, which is truly one of the messages that seems to get the most pushback from populations that are concerned about being over alerted, because these messages are frequently missing a lot of information. When we've looked at missing persons alerts, this includes Amber alerts as well, and we have presented this information to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children so that they can incorporate our findings into their recommendations. We found that 98% of WIAs issued for missing and endangered persons are missing crucial information. It doesn't clearly explain who is missing, where to look for people, and what to do if people are found. So the example on the right you see is the most standard of practice message that's issued in the state of California, which generally says it's the name of the alert. In this case, it's an Amber alert. That was issued in San Francisco, California, and there's a license plate and a brief car information. But it doesn't provide the additional information that's necessary for people to actually look for the individual who is missing. Missing persons alerts frequently rely on jargon. Amber alert is commonly used, and this is a case where it seems appropriate in many cases because we've had Amber alerts for decades. I recall as a child reading about a missing child on the back of a milk carton. It's been publicized, it's been shared across the US for so many years, it's very familiar to a lot of people. Even if they don't understand under what conditions an Amber alert is issued, they understand it means that a child is missing. But we have more than 40 different kinds of jargon terms representing different kinds of missing people now across the US. And people do not understand the difference between a purple alert or a green alert or a gold alert or a blue alert or a camo alert or a Zach alert or a feather alert or I mean, there's so many, and they are supported in different states for different kinds of populations, but many times it's the same population just using different names. So if you're going to use jargon, you have to have a lot of public knowledge about what the jargon means, and the alternative is to use plain language and to write complete messages. And they would look like this. Very similar again to what we've seen in imminent threat and all clear messages. It's the source followed by the name of the alert, the missing child, adult, older adult, followed by a description of the missing person, giving some clear indications, things that are really easily recognizable, like an element of their age, their race, their gender, their hair color. In some cases, it's appropriate to include their name, a description of their clothing, other vulnerabilities such as autism, mental capabilities that may be reduced, things that they may be facing as being disoriented, and then also indicating when they were last seen and the time, and then really importantly, directing them to additional information and telling them what they should do to help. So in this case, if seen, call 911. If you know that the person is drawn to water, drawn to music, drawn to outdoor areas, telling people where to help to look is another really useful piece to include in a missing person message. We have this content analysis was completed, and the paper that describes the experiments on this is under review, and I'll be happy to share that with you when it's published. So just kind of in conclusion, I'm almost done. I wanted to share with you the FEMA-IPAWS Message Design Dashboard, which we built with the funding from them. And this is what we built. So there's no audio, I'm just going to talk you through it. When you open up the Message Design Dashboard, you end up on this landing page, and you click on Create Message. It gives you the option of creating a 360 character message or a 90 character message. We always suggest 360 first because it helps you to build the 90 as you're doing 360. It prompts you to do the workflow that's listed at the bottom. The first thing that asks you to do is enter your organization's name, and then to search for the particular hazard and the timing that it is occurring. It provides for you not just the hazard, but also the impact statement. It automatically populated that information for you. And then it prompts you to fill in the brackets by highlighting things in red that you need to replace with information such as location. And in this case, it is asking you to select from the things that have a slash in between them so that it's correct to your context. And then it offers you the protective actions that correspond with that particular hazard. As you click them, it starts to fill in the box, and it tells you what things you need to address, such as adding a phone number, selecting the specific contents that you want to emphasize in your message, and removing the brackets, and removing the slashes if in between words, if that's appropriate. It reminds you in this case, to check a source. And so here we would want to include the source information, such as a website. As that's being filled in, you can see on the right-hand side how many characters have been used. So you can tell that you still got a ways to go before you've run out of space to write your alert. So this is not used only for WIA. It can be used for your opt-in alerts as well. So if you're limited to 160 characters for an SMS message, you can just watch the number of characters that you're using as you're building your message. Here, it's checking to make sure that all of the characters were correct that could go out as a WIA, checking to make sure all the brackets were filled. It checked that the URL is actually active and working, so you're not sending out something that a person can't click on and it won't work. And also checking to make sure that there are no other issues found. So it gives you that additional compliance before you get to the end of the message and you preview it. When you finish writing the message, you copy that message into your clipboard, and it copies in a format that can be pasted directly into your alerting software, and it won't get all messed up. The 90 character message was being built at the same time the 360 character message was being written. And you can see that there's still a little bit of space to add things like location information and phone numbers. And it's showing you how much room is left on the right-hand side in that preview. So this was all funded with taxpayer dollars, tested, vetted, verified. We trained about 500 people across the US, and then compared their pre-training messages with their post-training messages, and found over and over again significant improvements in their knowledge as well as their ability to write good messages. This is another source I want to point you to. It's the warnroom.com, which is it's my blog where I take alert and warning messages that have been issued as wireless emergency alerts, and I show you how they can be improved by applying all of the evidence that I just shared with you. They're short entries, and there's about 150 of them up there. In some cases, I rewrite them, and they're all available on PBS Warn, so that's where I get them from. But in terms of taking all of this information, those resources are freely available. The thing that really takes work is the implementation. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes knowledge. There is training and consulting available. I do want to let you know that I'm going to start holding something called the Warning Boot Camp. which is going to be a 5-day boot camp online where we are writing messages so that by the time you finished your 5 days, you have a library of messages that are templated and ready to go when you need them. And from my conversations with emergency managers and PIOs, finding that time to dedicate to getting it done is one of the biggest challenges. Even when they have the knowledge to implement, getting it done is a real challenge. So for your next steps, build your templates, standardize them, make them consistent and evidence-based, practice writing, and develop a strategy for how you're going to get your messages out. This is my contact information if you'd like to reach out to me. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can have some conversation with the last 10 minutes that we have together. And I'm very curious to see if there are questions for conversation.
Jeannette, thank you. That was incredible. That was great. I loved it. So, if you are in the audience, if you would like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself and ask that question right now. If you're a little shy, if you want to type it into the chat, I'm monitoring the chat and I will ask the question for you. We do have some comments. So, Bo says the boot camp sounds amazing. I agree. I think it maybe should be standard practice for every emergency manager. Love to see that. John Bobel said the link to I don't remember which one. I think the message design dashboard worked. Whichever one we were talking about, whatever the case, I have all those in an email. I'm going to make sure I share them in the follow-up email that I send out. So I'm still waiting to see if we have some questions. I, of course, have questions. So my first question is going to be the post alert messaging. I am definitely going to email you and ask you for that lexicon on those. Is basically the advice going to be that there always be a post alert message for every wireless emergency alert that you send out?
We do not yet have data to support that being the decision because some people, in some cases, there might be a WIA that goes out that is more informational and doesn't really require a follow-up message. But in the case where the first message that goes out says you're going to get a second message, then absolutely. If you've asked people to take an action that requires something that's meaningful or requires effort, such as sheltering in place because of chemical release, where you've actually closed doors and windows and you wouldn't want people to come out until it is safe, yes, absolutely sending that WIA is important. The evacuation messages, it's a little more challenging because if they've evacuated the area, they're no longer in the same area where you drew your first polygon. So you need to use other channels to get that information out to people who have evacuated and for repopulation purposes. So if you tell people that they need to take an action and you tell them you're going to follow up, then absolutely. And those messages where people are sheltering, yes. We saw recently with there were a lot of swatting incidents as campuses reopened this fall, and one incident happened at a state university, a public university, where the incident was over and people were in lockdown and the lockdown was not lifted. And yet there were press conferences being held. And so clearly they missed the opportunity to close that event out by telling people it is now safe, you can conclude the actions you were taking. So you can really see the differences when it's missing and when it really needs to be sent. But I can't fully recommend that every message needs a post alert message, but there are some that you can absolutely say, yes, they do.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody out there have a question? If not, I certainly have another one. So while they're thinking about that, I saw before you started doing uh the examples, I thought I read on your slide that 21% of the 360 character messages are missing at least one of the five contents and only 3% of the 90 character. Did I read that right? And why are they better at 90 than 360?
Oh, no, they're better at 360 than 90. So
Oh, okay.
21% of 360 characters. And it's because the 90 character messages, they're just not long enough for you to include all of the really important information.
Okay, so I
Because
read that wrong. So okay, I just wanted to confirm that.
the WIA system, when it rolled out in ways that make your job really, really hard, and it drove people to look for more information because messages were incomplete. And thank goodness WIA 2.0 made it possible for you to write a complete message and reduce people's need to seek additional information. It dramatically improved it, but it's still a challenge.
Excellent. All right, I am not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm going to take the screen back. I have a couple of announcements, plus we're going to talk about the certificates. So if you have a question for Jeannette, feel free still, you can enter it in. Oh, here we go. We do have one from Bo. Is there a dedicated practice area for the message design dashboard, and how do folks get access to?
So when you go into the MDD is not linked to anything that is live. So once you get in there, you can play around with it. You can use it to build templates. You can practice with it. It's it's a feature that makes it difficult to use because it's not linked as an API to like an Everbridge or a Code Red or an OnSolve. So it requires an additional step to take that information and put it into your alerting software. But it's also a bonus because you're not going to send that message out on accident. So you can go in there, you can play with it, you can build messages, copy them, and put them into your own spreadsheets, or you can even just keep them stored there so that you can access them when you need them.
Excellent. Thank you. I actually have somewhere in my email, I have the original email that FEMA sent out when they announced that. I will try to find that and I will send that to you, Bo. I have 12:59. So really quickly, here's my contact information. Use this QR code if you want to get all of my contact information, including socials, text, phones, emails, all of that. If you ever need anything, please email me, and I will do my best to help. So certificates, we are going to issue certificates for attendance. The QR code here is a very short survey. If you would grab that right now, that would be great. There are four very basic questions using the Likert scale. Simple, just click a box on how you feel. There are two optional questions that you can enter if you would like. What would you tell another communication professional about this webinar? So if you enter something there, basically a recommendation, we may use that. I will put the recordings up on our YouTube channel. And then another option where you can list any suggestions or requests for future speakers or topics. It's very, very simple. Couple of things. We are going to automate this eventually. It is not at the moment. So I'm going to have to manually get the survey results and then push out the certificates. It's probably going to take a couple of days to work through this process and get it figured out. So don't be alarmed if you complete the survey and you don't get it the certificate right away. I'll make sure you get it. Eventually, it'll be automated. You do the survey, you get the certificate. Second, we are going to email these out. So make sure you proofread your name and your email as you enter it in the survey. That's who I'm sending it to. That's who's going to be listed on the certificate. So make sure you get that right. Otherwise, there may be spelling errors and stuff like that, and we don't want to do that. If you have any questions about this process, if you want me to send you a direct link to the survey, I will do that. The survey is only going to be open for about 10 days. And then I will close it. I will send out the surveys or the certificates, and I will open it back up for the next webinar, which is next month, which I'm going to talk about. We have a webinar on November 19th talking about AI prompting for public information officers. This is going to be Sabrina Merritt. She's with October Social Media. She is fantastic. I have attended one of her webinars where she talked about this very topic, and then I requested her because it is great. If you do anything with AI, you'll want to come to this one. I would likely say she will have you open up your AI preference tool and actually do some AI work while we are on the webinar. She's great. I love the webinar. I'm looking forward to it. Registration is already open for this. So if you want to sign up for it, you can sign up anytime. I will put information in the follow-up link or the follow-up email that I send on how to get signed up for this as well. I'm going to check my messages real quick. Um, Looks like, oh, I see somebody that can't read the QR code. I will get a link to you, Marilyn, and you can fill it out then. So looks like the chat is taken care of. Again, Jeannette, I want to thank you. Everybody help me give you a virtual round of applause to Jeannette. This was wonderful. I will be emailing Jeannette to get a couple of things, and then I will certainly send out a follow-up email with everything she mentioned. I'll send links to it, a link to the recording. This has been great. Anytime you want to come back and visit us in the Bluegrass State, you are welcome. Um, Look me up, give me a call, and we will get together. To the rest of you, have a great day. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you for joining us, and I will see you next month.